Mark, as the mother of 2 teenagers and 1 preteen, I'd like to thank you for giving me an opportunity I rarely have, which is to have the last word. So I shall cherish this experience probably for a number of years to come, until they're all out of the house. I got another 7 years or so. I'll come back to this slide, but the 7th conference is now coming to a close. And thank you very much. What's good about a 7th, we said annual, and when it was the 2nd annual, that seemed a little bit, stretching it. But now we're at 7, so this is truly an annual event, and we thank you all for joining us. I think as things become annual, you start to see kind of a pattern in that there's some old topics that keep reappearing, though with the updates. We also see new topics emerging. And I think what we saw also a lot of at this conference was also what we think might be to come, or at least a focus on we need to start looking in that direction. So there's a couple of obvious takeaways. So before I dig into anything more, a few things, remember this for next time. Before next conference, I think we have one piece of homework, and that comes from Kaveh. Check your XML. Because he's probably going to check it before we come back next year. And the second thing is monographs. They're peer-reviewed. Yeah, we all know that now, yeah. So that'll be the test next year. Have you gotten that with you? But anyway, I think that what was interesting was we really did kick off this year's conference with jumping into where are we going and the new. Because that's always, I think, what we think is sort of exciting, and we're wanting to know what's out there, what's on the horizon. And I think that it was really good that Jennifer Hansen, although she came a little bit later in the program, asked us, how would you change the world? Because it was, again, a reminder that for all we can talk about lowering prices and business models, at the end of the day, open access is also about what we can do to change the world and to make this somewhat different and to accelerate science. And we each come from a different perspective with our goal with that, but I think we share that. And I liked very much how Eileen, as a historian, actually made me think a little bit more about the future. And saying things like, we don't want to wait around and see what the future will bring, but we need to try and shape the future. And I think that's also part of coming to the conferences, whether it's this conference or others, to try and think how we ought to do that. And reminding us that practices are not set in stone. And that's the good thing about looking back, because we see that things we thought were really obvious and were entrenched aren't necessarily so. And that's very liberating, because it means that we can break free from them if that's what we so choose to do, because we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There may be some very good things that we don't want to just toss out because we think, well, they're not set in stone, so we can change them. I think, too, I'm trying to remember who said this, that, yes, I know who it was. It was Jonathan Gray, who said that we have a collective responsibility for the future of the system. And I think that's also important, and I think it reminds us that we are not just publishers. There's multiple stakeholders here. There's librarians, there's the researchers, funding bodies, and I think that theme came up in many of the talks during these 2 days, that we actually do need to come together and we need to find some of the collective solutions, because we do need infrastructure now. We've been building little pieces, and now we've got to sort of bring it all together. And whether that's how we bring publications and data together, or how we have an efficient system for what funders are looking for so that authors have an easier time navigating, that we have to do that in cooperation with one another, because we all have a collective gain to be had by doing that. Of course, we also touched upon some old topics, and among others, business models always come up again and again and again. And I think it's interesting that way back when we kept hearing that one size doesn't fit all. And it's clear that we never really thought that, because it really has never been one size fits all, but that everyone is still toying, be that with offsetting models, be that with the APCs. We now know Cogent radically has decided choose it yourself through the lightning talks we had yesterday. So we're still tweaking, we're still trying to find the way, and we're still trying to have a variety out there now that the marketplace is no longer set in stone, that we can think about new things. We also talked about policy, and of course that's always been around since the beginning. But what's different now is that we're starting to see some of the results of policy, and that's also spurring other policies. And so as we heard, both from Norway, small country in the north, to the Gates Foundation with enormous resources, there's a lot of collective interest there, but also there's a lot of experience to share with one another now, and that's also very good, because when the early policy discussions were coming up, there weren't too many people to compare with, but there's a lot of people to compare with today as we go forward. I thought this afternoon was actually, or this morning was actually for me personally, some of the more interesting things, because one of the things that we as a organizing committee realized was we've been missing a stakeholder group that's actually the most important, and that is the researchers themselves. And not least of which, the young researchers, because if part of what we want to do is not just look back and think about the new that we've got right now, if we really want to think about the future, we've got to figure out how are they thinking. And as young as I like to think I am, I have to realize my PhD was quite a long time ago now. And so it's really been terrific, actually, to hear Stephen Curry, who's still telling us new things, but as a senior researcher, but then following up from some of the young career researchers to let us know what's happening. And I think, though, that one of the things that probably shook me a little more than anything else was actually Marcus's talk. Not because it surprised me, not because it wasn't something I didn't already know, but I think that for me there's a huge takeaway there in that we're living in an age right now where a lot of people are questioning science. We have parents who are not vaccinating their children because they don't trust science anymore, and I think probably collectively in this room we think we'd like to see them vaccinating. And, you know, we can build the most wonderful infrastructure, we can lower our APCs, we can do all sorts of things, but if the science isn't credible, it's all for nothing. So I think that we actually have, and going back to this collective responsibility, I think this is where we have a huge collective responsibility to try and think about what are we going to do to improve this on all fronts. So I was really thankful for that talk, kind of a waking up and shaking up. And that sort of comes around to the Creative Commons and the sharing again. And it was very good to have that because our very first conference, we had a keynote from Creative Commons. So it's nice to kind of return to that because that's our roots and it is a topic that will continue to come up and that we as a WASPA will continue to support. So, rounding off, I'd like to very much thank our sponsors. It makes this conference possible. You see all of them here: Copyright Clearance Center, Copernicus Publications, PLOS, Hindawi, Cogent, River Valley, as always, Karger Open Access, MDPI, EDP Sciences, Frontiers, and Crossref. And what's really exciting is we're already planning next year's conferences. We're already talking about the topics. And folks, we're going to be in Washington, D.C., so we're coming stateside. And it will be the week starting September 19th. We still have to book in the exact dates, and we are still finalizing the venue. We're in discussions with some venues. So very, very soon, look for the announcements, and we'll let you know that we're coming. For those of you who have been having to travel to us, we'll finally travel to you. And I'd also like to then finally thank the Dutch Royal Academy for, again, hosting us. It's been lovely. These have been really nice facilities. And, of course, to Ilko, who, as our local contact, has been on the ground and helping with all sorts of details. And, as always, Claire Redhead, we have to give you a collective thank you because Claire, as you know, just makes it all happen. Thank you, Claire. And on that, I wish you all a lovely lunch. There's lunch being served before you have to run off. We understand if you need to run off. And if you do, and if we don't see you at lunch, then I hope we see you next year in DC. And thank you so much to all of you for coming, because what's a conference without all of you? Take care. Happy trails.